I know Cupid's not an angel. I feel like I need to say that right off the bat, or else that's going to be the only thing anyone wants to talk about in the comments. But he is related to angels, right? Because he looks like a cherub. And cherubim are a kind of angel, and they're described as being all cute and chubby, and nope. There's a reason these guys have to start every interaction with "be not afraid." So I have written and rewritten the script for this intro so many times. I keep trying to explain the historical and cultural connections between Cupid and biblically accurate angels without going too in-depth and getting off topic, but without leaving anything out. There's Cupid and Eros and Putti and cherubim and seraphim, and it's all a little bit above my pay grade as a sewing and crafting YouTuber, you know? The gist is you have Cupid. Cute, sweet, modern mascot for Valentine's Day. Not an angel, but he does resemble some depictions of angels. Other flavors of angels, often referred to as biblically accurate angels, do not resemble Cupid at all. They have too many eyes, or too many wings, or are just a pair of interlocking rings made out of light, but are also somehow still covered in eyes. Are they really biblically accurate? Debatable. But I'm not going to delve into early Christian esotericism to try and hash that out. What I do know is that these depictions of angels are, to use a technical term, sick as hell. I want to mash these two aesthetics, Cupid and biblically accurate angels, together into one design because I think it will look cool and be fun to do. I've come up with a concept design that combines the delicate frills of Cupid with the literal awesome demeanor and unsettling number of eyes of biblically accurate angels. So, let's dive in. So I want to start off with the corset, because I think that's going to take the longest, and a lot of things have to build off of that. So I wanted to do something a little bit different than what I normally do for all of my corsets and bodices. I keep them pretty simple, so I wanted to try something a little bit different. I played around with some draping tape on my dress form, and I came up with a design that I like. Oh, random side note about the dress form. A couple of videos ago, I think it was the Percy Jackson video, but I mentioned wanting to come up with a name for the dress form, so I asked you guys for opinions. Someone suggested, since my channel name is Morning Mercury, the dress form could be Evening Venus, and I thought Eve as a nickname would be really cute, so henceforth, the dress form is called Eve. Thank you, Eve. Sorry I put needles in you. Anyway, the corset. I played around with some draping tape, worked out a design that I like. Going to have a little heart-shaped cutout right at the top. I've seen a couple designs like this on Pinterest and I think they're really cute. And I also want to try and do like bust cups. I haven't done a corset or a bodice with cups in a really long time. I've only done it once and I didn't do it very well that time. This was way before I started doing YouTube. So I'm excited to try it out again and see what I can do. And also, I feel like the way I have the cups structured makes them kind of look like eyes, and that's on theme. I'm also going to do a sweetheart neckline because it feels very round and cutesy, and also it has the word heart in it. So to create this corset, I'm going to start with my Old Faithful red-threaded 1880s corset pattern. I'm going to make a mock-up version of this, and then mark that up and make all of the alterations that I need for this pattern. I don't really know how to do the boobs. I've got some foam cups left over from I think I took them out of like a bathing suit or a sports bra or something. I want to see if I can use those to add structure. We'll see. I don't really know what I'm doing. We'll figure something out. So let's make a mock-up. I cut out and assembled a simple mock-up of the corset pattern out of quilting cotton. I didn't bother adding boning or any other structure since I was just looking to make some simple changes to the shape. I stitched on some lacing strips left over from an old corset mock-up so I could try it on. The top edge of the existing pattern was a bit lower than I wanted, so I just taped on a fabric extension and then sketched out my alterations. I ended up making a full tape pattern for the bust cup, which I'll talk more about later because they were a process. But with the mock-up done, I can move on to the real thing. I cut an interlining layer out of a heavyweight canvas and then a lining layer out of cotton muslin. I assembled both layers separately, then flatlined them together by stitching the boning channels. I also cut out the outer layer of the corset pattern from a white satin. I got this as a remnant at my local fabric store and it has a really lovely pattern woven into it. I found the same fabric in different colors on Mood's website and they call it an ecclesiastical medallion jacquard, which sounds much fancier than churchy circles, which is what I was calling it. This fabric was perfect for this project. The pattern motif fit in with the biblically accurate angel theme, and it also added texture to what otherwise would have been a solid block of white, but also wouldn't clash too much with the other patterns and textures in the design. The only downside is that this is a satin jacquard. Both satin and jacquard on their own are a pain to work with, so with their powers combined, this was a very annoying step of the process. It was slippery, it frayed like crazy, but I did manage to get some pretty decent pattern matching purely by coincidence. So it was all worth it in the end. I stitched the outer layer and the flatline layers together, right sides facing, leaving the bottom edge open. Then I turned it right side out. I gave that a press and added some zip ties for boning, then I could close the bottom edge by hand with a slip stitch. With the main body of the corset done, I could move on to the cups, which, as I said, were a process. I had my tape pattern from earlier ready to go, but my plans had already been scuttled because I only had one foam cup in my stash. I have no idea when or why I would have used just one boob cup, but this meant I had to do something else for the base structure. So I made my own cups by tracing my pattern onto interfacing, cutting that out, and fusing them to some felt. I cut out the interfaced felt pieces with no seam allowance so that I could assemble them by butting the pieces against each other and zigzag stitching them together. I reinforced the heart cutout with some twisted together wire that I hand sewed along the edge. I stitched some twill tape onto the center of each cup to create a casing for some more boning to add a little extra structure. I encouraged the boning to curve by heating it up with the iron, folding it in half, and clamping it into place while it cooled. I cut and assembled the outer and lining layers for each cup using the same pattern, stitched them together bag lining style, turned them right side out, then jammed the felt cup structure in between them and hand sewed the opening shut. Then the two cups could be hand sewn to the body of the corset, and I confirmed something I had begun to suspect for a while. It looked wrong. I had the cups meeting in the middle with a vertical seam just under the cutout, but in my tape draping experiments the cups met at just a single point. So I unpicked the layers of both cups at the center, marked out a new shape for the cutout that would get rid of that vertical seam, then trimmed back the felt layer and restitched everything by hand to fit the new shape. With that fixed, I could slap in some eyelets and reinforce them by stitching over them with embroidery floss. Finally, I can move on to the beading. I wanted red beads radiating out from the cutout, like blood splattering after getting hit with one of Cupid's arrows. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you'll know I love a beaded chest wound. I also wanted the beading to be reminiscent of the rays of light in Sacred Heart motifs. I outlined the cutout with bugle beads, then added in the radiating lines until I was happy with how it looked, and then the corset was complete. So now that the corset is all done, I'm going to move on to the shirt that goes underneath that. I want something very light and floofy and billowy, so I'm going to be using this lace net as the main body of the shirt, and then I've also got some red velvet for the cuffs and the collar. I'm going to keep this very simple. It's just going to be rectangles for the most part, plus a basic stand collar pattern that I've already drafted a while ago, and then I'm going to add some more detail with some beading, but I'll explain that a bit more when I get to that point. So for now, I'm just going to start on the shirt. I cut 4 rectangles out of the lace net, 2 for the front and back panels, and 2 for the sleeves. The front and back panels needed a curved cutout for the neckline, and to make sure I got that shape right, I decided to just make the collar first. I cut my stand collar pattern out of interfacing and fused that to the back of my red velvet. I cut out that piece along with a second non-interfaced layer. I stitched those 2 pieces together, right sides facing, leaving the bottom edge open and using my machine's walking foot to keep everything from sliding around. I trimmed the corners and cut notches into the seam allowance around the curved edge to help the bulky fabric turn out as cleanly as possible. The collar was ready to be attached to the shirt at this point, so I could have switched back to cutting out the lace net, but my machine was already threaded with red, so I decided to get the red velvet cuffs ready instead. This was a good call because my velvet fabric would soon be commandeered by my apprentice. The cuffs are just rectangles, folded in half lengthwise, and stitched at the short ends before turning them out. With all the velvet pieces taken care of, I could finally switch back to the net. I cut out a perfectly shaped neck hole, then stitched the front and back panels together at the shoulder seams. This fabric doesn't fray, it's basically just tulle, but you can see through it and see all the seams because it's basically just tulle, so for the sake of cleanliness, I did flat felt seams on the whole garment. I stitched up the side seams and attached the collar, then I moved on to the sleeves. I gathered the sleeves down to fit into the cuffs, stitched those on, then attached the sleeves to the body of the shirt. I added snaps to each cuff and hook and bar closures to the collar, and the shirt was ready for embellishment. I wanted the shirt to be covered in eyes, a hallmark of the angelic aesthetic. With the shirt and corset both on, I thread marked on the shirt around the top edge of the corset so I knew where the eyes would actually be visible. For the net parts of the shirt, I used buttons for the whites of the eyes. Terrible decision. And embroidery floss in shades of red and pink to make the irises. I found that buttons with 4 holes worked best for stitching a round embroidered iris. I started by stitching an X through the holes, pretty standard button stuff. Then I stitched a box around the X. To turn that box into a circle, I did a sort of woven rosette thing. I brought the needle up through one of the buttonholes, then slid it under the floss that formed one of the sides of the box. moving from the inside of the box to the outside. You don't want to pull on the thread too tightly, that will snug the rosette down and you won't really get a circle. I did the same with the next side of the box, passing under the floss, moving outwards, and continued all around the box until I got back to the start of the weaving. Then I brought the needle down through the buttonhole I had come up through and fastened off the floss. I did a similar process with the 2-hole buttons, but it was a bit more finicky since I couldn't make that box shape to weave into. I eyeballed the arrangement of the buttons, pun absolutely intended, spacing them out much more on the sleeves to avoid weighing down the billowiness. For the collar, I scrounged up some faux pearl necklaces from the thrift store. I cut the strings of beads down to fit along the collar, then I stitched them on by hand. I covered the collar in beads of varying sizes, and then I set about turning the pearls into more eyes. I used a Q-tip to paint on irises and shades of red and pink, then I used a paint pen to add tiny white pupils. So, moving on to the skirt. I want to do something very like floaty and lightweight, kind of like a ballerina skirt. So I've got 2 sheer curtain panels. I've got one that's just a solid pink. It's a little bit stiff, so I think it'll add a little bit of body to the skirt. And I've got this other one that's an off-white kind of ivory color that's got these little embroidered flowers all over it. My plan is to layer the white on top of the pink so I can get like a nice light pink color. I want to keep this super simple. I'm not going to add pockets into this. I know, it's just, they're both such lightweight materials, it would be a lot of work to like reinforce them properly and have them set into the waistband, and I don't want to put that much effort into this. So, no pockets in this one. That just means I get to make another purse. So I'm just gonna slap these together and make a real quick skirt. I unpicked the hems on the short ends of each panel, pressed out the creases, and then sewed the short ends together to make 2 big rings. I folded the white panel in half lengthwise, which was a bit weird because it was ring-shaped now, but it worked out. I folded the pink panel in half too, but it was a bit shorter so it couldn't be folded perfectly in half and still be as long as the white layer, so it had a weird sort of peplum thing going on under all the layers. Then I stitched down the folded edge for both panels and sewed them together. I added another round of top stitching very close to the edge to make a channel, added in some elastic, and the skirt was done. And really bad. It doesn't come across on camera as bad as it was in person, but it was so bad. I don't know why I constructed the skirt like this. I have never made a skirt like this. It wasn't easier than the way I usually would. It was so weird and lumpy. I unpicked the whole thing straight away and started remaking it more carefully the next morning. I cut away the excess pink fabric to get rid of that weird hidden peplum thing, and then used that to make an actual waistband. I gathered the white layer down by machine, and pleated the pink layer to reduce bulk at the waist. I mentioned earlier that I was making a ballerina style skirt. In the design phase of this project, I was having a lot of difficulty merging the Cupid and Angel aesthetics. They have some overlapping elements, but in my mind, Cupid's vibe is very soft and round and cute, while angels are more angular and linear and stark. Angels are Kiki and Cupid is Booba, essentially. I could not merge these disparate aesthetics in my mind, so I tried to find something that bridged the gap, and oddly enough, I settled on ballerinas. The overall ballet aesthetic has both the soft roundness of Cupid and the sharpness and linearity of angels. I'm not sure if that makes total sense, but it was a real light bulb moment for me, and incorporating some elements of classic ballerina costumes into the design really made it work for me. To finish off this ballet-inspired skirt correctly this time, I sewed the top edge of the gathered white layer and the pleated pink layer together, and then I encased that edge in the waistband. I added some ribbon ties at the back for a closure, and I had a much less lumpy skirt. So, it's time to move on to the wings, which are probably the part that I am the most intimidated by, but are also like the most interesting part of the whole design, in my opinion, so a little nervous. I'll be honest, when I started working on this project, I had no idea how I was gonna make these wings. I did do some research and I watched some videos of other people making big wings with like multiple sets, and they all seem very well thought out and very heavily engineered. And I've got like 2 days to finish this, but I think I've come up with something that will work, hopefully. I have acquired a few of these things. I am not entirely sure what they are. I got them at an art supply swap yesterday, actually. A bunch of people brought in art and craft supplies that they have that they don't use anymore and laid it all out, and then you can go through and pick out stuff that you might want. And there were several of these flexible plastic tubes. They're like the kind of thing that you would have like on a vacuum cleaner, but like There's these little silicone fittings at the ends. I have no idea what these were for or why they were there, but they're like a couple feet long. I think like 6 feet long. They're about 6 feet long. I've got 3 of them, so that should be enough for what I'm doing. These are very lightweight and flexible, so I think that will be good to get like a lot of movement in the wings, but obviously it's not gonna have much structure because like it bends so easy. So my plan is, let me use my mic like a microphone. So my plan is to use like wooden dowels or something. This is just a knitting needle, and then put the plastic tubes onto that, and that'll create like the shape that I need. That'll have a rigid portion that will stay pretty still, and then have the more floppy, flexible part that can be like the outer portion of the wing. And then I will have like a fabric sleeve for the feathers that just slips onto the tube. That way that everything should stay pretty lightweight and not too cumbersome to wear. And also I think that way I'll be able to disassemble everything. The tubes with the fabric can just slide on and off and attach somehow. So that's the rough idea. Hopefully it made sense. Hopefully it works. I think the first step is going to be to build the back structure with all of the wooden pieces sticking out, and then move on from there. I started by bending some heavy gauge wire into a squared off U shape. This part will slip into the back of my corset and is how the wings will stay on my back. I taped together several layers of wire to make sure it's very sturdy and can support the weight of the wings. I ended up not having enough dowels for the wings, but we did have plenty of these thin rectangular scraps of wood that just barely fit into the tubes. I cut those down into 6 20-inch long pieces, 4 of which had angled ends. These could then be assembled like so, giving me 3 prongs for wing attachment per side. I did some very scuffed woodworking to attach all of these pieces. First by just screwing into the corner where the 3 pieces met, which was extremely unstable. So I added a cross brace of more scrap wood to reinforce that. Now I had 2 scary looking showgirl fans. I made some extenders for my wire U-shaped thing so that it could be attached to the new wood structures. But I realized these wings would be very wobbly if I kept the 2 wood parts separate, so I added more scrap cross bracing to bridge the gap. I used gaff tape to attach the wire to the wood, and I was starting to get something wearable. Okay, so now that I have the now that I have the rigid part of the wing structure done, I'm going to add on the tubes. I've got 3 of them. They're all a little under 6 feet. They had these little rubbery connector bits at the ends. I've already cut them off of this one. I'm gonna cut them off the other 2 and then cut each of them in half. And then I'm going to slot them onto my wood bits here. The tubes just barely fit onto the wood. I have to like squeeze them a little bit to make them a bit flatter and wider to get them to sleeve over, but they fit. They stay on pretty securely, but they're still easy enough to remove. I'm already thinking I'm gonna have to put some heavy wire through the tubes just to get them a little bit more rigid, because I feel like they're gonna flop down a little bit too much, especially with the weight of the fabric. So time for some tube dissection. I'd like to take a moment to thank my lovely patrons whose support allows me to take on projects as weird as this one. In particular, I'd like to thank those in the Magnanimous Maelstroms tier: Oscar, Obedient Kenobi, Evelyn, Trapped in the Midwest, Bear Hardy, and Perfect Primrose. Okay, so this is something. The weirdest thing I've ever done. Definitely need to do a little bit more structure. This side has no reinforcement whatsoever. This side does. Top guy here, I just stuck a knitting needle in and just kind of like jammed the point in between the tube and the wood. So that's definitely helping get the shape that I want for the upper wing. I don't want to have to sacrifice my knitting needles for this, so I'm going to cut down a chunk of dowel that I have. It's actually from a flagpole, but don't worry about it. This guy in the middle, I have a piece of wire in. Just wrapped the end around the wood, taped it in place, and then slipped the tube back on, and that's definitely helping. It's not quite as structural as I want it for this one, but I've only got 1 strand of wire in there, so I could double or triple that up and add some more rigidity. And then I'll do the same thing for the bottom guy. This one doesn't have anything in it other than the wood and the tube. I'm thinking I might cut the bottom tubes a little bit shorter. I'll stick the wire in and see how I feel about that. We're definitely getting somewhere. It looks insane right now. I look like some kind of vacuum cleaner peacock deity. It's very fun to move around it. My cat hates this. He hates it. He's very interested by it though, so he can't just run away and not be around it. He has to like stay and watch it, but he does not like it moving. Gotta do more woodworking. Woodworking is a very generous term for this. I'm gonna go cut this dowel down and put more wire in my tubes, and then hopefully the base structure should be done and I can move on to making it look good. I added my dowels and my wire to further support my tubes. Then I painted all of the wood bits white to help them blend in a bit better. I reattached all my tubes, but I didn't like how the ends were curling in, so I added some more dowels to help straighten them out. Now I could finally start making these actually look like wings. I'm using lace curtain panels instead of feathers to get more of that soft, demure look into this piece. I took some measurements, worked out a pattern, then cut out my pieces. I made use of the scalloped edge of my lace panels to add to the wing shape. I cut out one main wing-shaped piece and then another thinner piece. I'm basically just making a really weird curtain with a rod pocket. I trimmed the edges of the thinner piece to be more feathery, then I pressed it in half and sandwiched the top edge of the main piece into that fold, almost like a binding. Then I stitched them together 2 inches from the folded edge to create a channel for the tube. Then I could sleeve the lace on, which was a lot like trying to put pantyhose on an octopus, but it was looking quite wing-shaped. I repeated the process for the rest of the wings. Unfortunately, my lace panels only had enough of the scalloped edge for 4 out of the 6, so I had to freehand some squiggly edges for 2 of the wings. I put those in the middle of the set with the hopes that they would look more intentional. As a final step, I hand sewed some twill tape ties to the wood structure. These will come around from my back and tie in the front, just to add more stability to the wings and keep them from flopping around on just the wire tucked into the corset. The final piece was the halo. I used some foam backer rod that I happened to have on hand. It's meant for filling in gaps when you're using grout or caulk. It's similar to the texture of a pool noodle and has even less structural integrity, so once I snipped off a chunk, I used an X-Acto knife to cut halfway into the foam all along the length. Then I added some wire into the cut and closed it back up with hot glue. I left long tails of the wire at both ends so I could attach the backer rod to a headband. That single piece of wire was not very sturdy though, so I glued more to the inner edge of the halo ring. This one was a flat wire, so it added a lot of stability while also staying nice and low profile. Then I cut out some 4-pointed stars out of craft foam with a little hole in the center of each one. I marked out equidistant points all around the foam rod, then hot glued the stars in place. I used the tip of the hot glue gun to melt away some of the backer rod behind the holes in the stars. Then I glued a white marble into each one. Or I would have if I hadn't remembered that I still needed to paint this, so I popped them out for now. I gave the whole thing a few coats of Mod Podge to seal the foam before hitting it with a white base coat and then a final coat of gold. Then the marbles could be added back in and get some more details with some Posca pens. The final bit were the little feathers. I just scrunched some lace down into a fan shape, machine stitched it into place, and then hand sewed some wire to the back to give it more structure. I made a second plume the exact same way, and then, using a pressing ham as a wig head, hot glued them both to the headband at the temples, and that completed my biblically accurate Cupid. I just recorded the whole outro and my mic was muted the entire time, so take 2. That is it. Ta-da! I'm pretty happy with it, all things considered. I really like the halo. I think that came out super cute, considering it's just like stuff that I already had, plus some marbles from the thrift store. One of the marbles did fall out when I was getting ready and I had to super glue it back in, but so far, all the rest of them are holding strong. I really like the corset. I think It's really cute. There's definitely some fit issues with the construction and everything. It needs more structure. It probably needs less weight hanging off of it would probably help. And I don't think I totally got the construction of the bust cups 100%, but all things considered, I think it's really pretty, and I really, really like the cutout and the beading all around it. I think that's so cute. One specific detail I really like is the way that the buttons on this part of the shirt just kind of look like eyes coming directly out of my skin, which was what I was hoping for. The wings, I'm thinking of these as a 1.0 version, a beta version, if you will. They're very cool. I think they have a cool effect. They are definitely a little wonky. I don't know why this one is so sad and falling over. Definitely a little lopsided. But also, this is the first time I've ever made any wings at all. Should I have done something smaller and simpler for my first time? Definitely. Yes, definitely. But you know, go big or go home. I went big and I'm already at home. So could definitely use some more layers of lace to kind of fill them out and fluff them up more. And the structure is very wonky, but all things considered, I'm very happy with how they came out. I think they're very cool. They're really lightweight. They're honestly not that uncomfortable to wear. Having the ties down here is certainly very helpful for keeping them balanced and feeling secure on my body. They are very difficult to maneuver around in though. I would not want to wear these like to an event of any sort. But yeah, I think maybe one day I will revisit these, rework them, remake them or something, because I think they look very cool. I am worried about where I'm going to keep them, but I'll figure it out. I'll find some space somewhere. That is it for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you had a lovely Valentine's Day. Hope you got some chocolate and like looked at the color pink. If you didn't, this video should have fulfilled that quota. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Have a lovely rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. I'm not doing the thing where I like drop down out of frame. I might actually die if I did that in this.